My number three is The Saint from 1997. This is a film directed by Philip Noyce, starring Val Kilmer and Elizabeth Shue. And the IMDb plot summary: Simon Templar, aka The Saint, is a thief for hire whose latest job to steal the secret process for cold fusion puts him at odds with a traitor bent on toppling the Russian government, as well as the woman who holds its secret. This movie is not a great movie. I'll admit that at the at the outset. Though I haven't,
Thank God.
it's a guilty pleasure for me though. I will not defend the movie, but I love it. However, I wanted to start off my list with honoring a 90s soundtrack that meant a lot to me, but also I think this is an era of soundtracks that is gone, does not really exist anymore, of these big soundtracks with a lot of big artists. There's a big single on it. There were big selling soundtracks. And nowadays, I think really maybe streaming might have killed this, where there's no reason to compile together a soundtrack anymore because you can stream all the individual tracks that are available. So I wanted to make sure to talk about that. This is my 90s soundtrack on here, but also I think that this is one of those soundtracks, like we were just talking about, that did get me interested in a whole type of music, electronic music, that I was not at all interested in at the time, and now is one of my favorite genres. And most of the music I listen to is actually electronic music that I can trace back to this soundtrack. So just before I get more into the soundtrack and then a little more into the film, like, had you seen this movie before?
I'd seen this movie before, or at least had like vague memories of this movie.
Yeah.
For the music, but also it being like this sort of, hot erotic thriller sort of movie. So, but I hadn't thought about it since ever. So it was fun to go back to it. Although I was like, I thought in my head, I imagined this movie to be a lot sexier and hotter for some reason, but it wasn't. I'm like, I was like, where is all the nudity in this movie?
There wasn't nudity, but I actually was like surprised in how hot and sexy this movie was. I didn't remember it being this sexy, I guess is the word for it. And maybe this is something else too that's kind of been in the zeitgeist a lot, of how movies are completely sexless now. And there's this comparison around to dry movies and wet movies, and I think there's no wet movies made anymore. And it just was surprising, like, in that mindset now, going back and watching this, because I've seen it every couple of years, but I haven't seen it probably in like 2 years all the way through. And I was like, wow, this movie is so like charged. And a lot of that has to do with the music, I will say. Like, a lot of the scenes are really elevated by the use of the songs. There's that great Sneaker Pimp's Six Underground song during their initial kind of like tryst back at her apartment. That really just adds to the scene, but then also makes the song cool, which I think is something else that one of the reasons why I chose this film is it makes the music cool because of what's happening, at least for me. And maybe this is just me here.
It's cheesy cool.
It's cheesy cool.
Yeah. But it's cool. And also, I think the word you're looking for is moist, not wet.
Are we? Should we put a warning in front of the episode if we're using that word? I know a lot of people don't like that word. I mean, they place a content warning on this episode. But yeah, so again, for me, it was around, this movie has, it's cheesy cool. But, as a kid, when I was a teenager, I thought it was cool. Like gangsters in all black with their little cane, Eastern European gangsters.
You wanted to be Val.
Well, I wanted actually to be the Russian guys. I thought Val was awesome, cool too. But like these Russian guys driving around their black Range Rovers, like looking so cool, listening to like this, industrial techno, really loud in their car. I'm like, oh, that's such cool music. These guys are so cool. And then I have to go out and get the soundtrack. And then I'm listening to, Chemical Brothers and stuff, and Moby, that really cool Moby track that plays. And I'm like, I'm cool like
really
those guys.
Moby track.
But yeah, it's like the coolness of the movie bleeds into the soundtrack. And then I get the soundtrack, and now there's all these tracks on there that are barely used in the movie too, which is something that I think is an art of soundtracks as well. Like, they all capture the theme of the movie and the tone of it, but not every song is, a whole sequence in the film. Sometimes you just hear it in the background for like 5 minutes.
Right.
But it's there on the soundtrack. And then that got me into all this, Daft Punk was on there. I never heard of them before I listened to this. Again, Chemical Brothers. So this really ignited a whole love of an entire genre of music for me. And it was due to, those Eastern European gangsters and Val Kilmer.
Goodness. That's aged well.
I mean, the movie's incredibly dated, not only in like the fact, again, that it's wet/moist, which movies aren't anymore. The movie itself, which again, I'm not going to defend it, even though I love it. It takes itself like very seriously, even though it's very dumb. And I think that was something in the 90s with some of these thrillers, more like adult tinged thrillers, where they were trying to elevate it, but the material wasn't elevated. Everything else was. Like, Philip Noyce is a great director. All the actors are acting like they're in some, highfalutin international spy drama. but the plot is absolutely ridiculous. The sequences are ridiculous. The whole second act is them just running from room to room and nothing's going on. I was like,
and
nothing's
so
happening.
many things that are just completely unanswered questions of like how and why. Like the other Russian woman with the beret. I'm like, why are you here? What are you doing? Where did you come from? You haven't been here the whole time.
Yeah.
Just so many things that happen in the third act that make absolutely no sense.
Oh, totally.
But, you're totally right. Like I don't know. I'm maybe because we are 90s kids, I'm nostalgic for this genre of like elevated, dumb, big budget kind of thriller movie, which is, world globe-trotting passport movie with, people that look beautiful and cool. Like that's gone.
Right. It is.
It was fun to go back and visit it just for those reasons. I will say though, Elizabeth Shue is like the most ridiculous performance. Val is good. I don't know. It's like something about the smiling face. I'm like, why are you smiling the whole time? And also, like the screenplay is just
it's not
hilarious.
It's silly. No. It's so silly.
Yeah, she's like, we've been in trouble with your mafia. Like, who says that?
I know. Look, I love Elizabeth Shue in this movie. I think she's never looked this good.
She looks amazing.
The performance is kind of silly. She's trying to like play this sort of Catholic schoolgirl because that's sort of his psychology, because that girl died in the beginning of the movie that he was in love with, but then trying to be innocent, but she has to be smart at the same time, but then socially awkward. I don't know if it really totally works. And you can tell that Val also thinks he's in some very important movie that he's not really in, trying all these different voices and mannerisms
and wigs. I love the wig factory.
Oh, it's so great. It's
like, what are you going to be putting on now?
I know. And I'm a huge Val Kilmer fan too. And this, especially at this time when I was a kid, it was like The Doors and Ghosts in the Darkness and Heat and all these movies coming out. He's like so cool. And Batman Forever. Like he's Batman now. And what is he going to do? So that was another reason why like anything in this movie was cool to me, including the music, again, that I never would have really gravitated towards. Just to bring it back to the music a little bit here. But I listen to the soundtrack still more. I've listened to the soundtrack way more than I've seen the movie all the time. It's like a good thing to throw in the background to do work, or just to kind of there's a good like nice house sort of trance stuff on here to kind of relax a little bit. But yeah, I had to throw this on the list, and it was fun to rewatch it.
I will say though, like you were saying, it's a great intro to that genre of music, which I love as well. And I was trying to think about Chemical Brothers and Daft Punk and think about how did I get onto them, and I couldn't remember. But I'm guessing this movie and movies of this time had a role to play in it. But the music isn't used that much in the movie. I mean, it's so far pushed in the background that there were times I'm like, is this the score or the soundtrack? Because it's just, you get like glimpses of the music, so it's not really using the music in any particular way other than the cheesy cool part that we talked about.
Right. And I think that again is where in the 90s this happened a lot, where there'd be a couple tracks in there, like the Sneaker Pimp song I remember back at the time was huge. That 6 Underground song, that was the one that really popped, and that is a scene where it's definitely used in the movie.
Right.
But all the rest of these tracks really aren't, and it's not a movie where the music is necessarily trying to add a lot to it, but it gets you interested enough, at least for me, to then go off and buy the soundtrack. And then that's where you listen to the whole thing and it explores a particular type of music. And I think this was something that was done a lot.
Like the merchandising thing.
Yeah,
really.
Exactly. It was music from and inspired by. That was a whole category of soundtracks that were huge in the 90s, like Mission Impossible 2, Blade, The Matrix. These were giants. Batman Forever even was a huge soundtrack based on, one song that was barely in the movie. But it was a whole genre that I really appreciated. And there's a lot of skill to putting those things together. Even if it's not used in the movie, all those songs do capture something about what the film does. Oh, and just one more note just on the film to defend it a little bit. There were a massive amount of like reshoots and changes to the third act of the movie. There was a whole sequence of cut. She was originally supposed to die. He was supposed to come back, and it turns into a revenge thing in the third act. And they pulled it after some test screenings. So that's why when you see it, it's sort of it
makes no sense.
It makes no sense. It sort of ends abruptly. There's so many plot threads that don't ever get tied up. So I think there's a different version, at least, whether it's better or not, who knows. There's a different version of this movie that does exist out there somewhere. Even in the trailer, you can see a bunch of those scenes. It's just they filmed whole sequences that they totally excised. If you like cheesy 90s, thriller spy movies, I definitely recommend it. It's one of Val Kilmer's, I think, best as a movie star movies in terms of representation of what he was trying to do, at least. as an actor. Though again, I'm not going to defend this movie as a movie, but great soundtrack.
Great soundtrack.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.